This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. I'm back at you this week with another terrific video story, and you can see the title on your screen. Man refuses to celebrate 25th anniversary with wife who cheated years ago. And you can look at the captions above their heads where the woman says, "I can't believe he's never forgiven me." And the guy says, "I only stayed married for the kids." Now, let's get into this story and see what it's all about. He starts off and he says, "Last week my wife asked if we could renew our wedding vows next month on our 25th anniversary. Without hesitation, I told her no and couldn't stop myself from laughing in her face. Now, before you start calling me names, let me explain why I reacted that way. I reacted that way because she cheated on me years ago and I have never completely gotten over it. In fact, we're still legally separated even though we've never lived apart. I met my wife in early '96 and we married 2 years later. We were both busy with our careers back then, so we married a little later in life. At the time, we were both in our early 30s. So that was like 25, 26 years ago, so these folks are in their late 50s now. After 3 years of marriage, we started our family and my wife stepped away from her career for a time to be a mother. Over a period of 5 years, she gave birth to our 2 sons and our daughter, who is our youngest. When my daughter started preschool, my wife started back working part-time from home. Then as our kids got older, she started picking up more hours and started going back into the office a few days a week. While our lives could get really hectic at times, all in all, things were really good between us. We were still in love and made a conscientious decision to maintain a healthy work-life balance. That's always important. We seemed to have it all back then. A great marriage, 3 great kids, a nice home, and more than enough money to support our lifestyle. Then early one evening 11 years ago, I came home from work and my wife was sitting alone in the living room with the lights out. I asked her where the kids were and she said they were over at her mother's house. At first, I thought she had planned a romantic evening for the 2 of us, which she would do from time to time. However, that was not the case. Instead, she told me we needed to talk. Oh boy, here comes that talk. After she said that, my mind started racing and I asked her who died, as the last time I heard those words was from my mother when she told me my dad had passed away. She assured me it wasn't that, then got up and gave me a big hug. When she pulled away, I could see she was crying as she took my hand and asked me to sit beside her on the couch. There she proceeded to tell me that for the past month, she had been having an affair with a guy she worked with. Oh man, that's one way to ruin an evening. Of all the things to come out of her mouth, that's not something I ever expected or thought I would hear. I sat there and listened in stunned silence as she explained what happened and why she was telling me this now. According to her, they had been working closely over the past few months and things just developed. At first, it was just kissing, which eventually led to them giving each other blank, which you know what that is, which eventually led to full-fledged X, which they had been having for the past 2 weeks. So if she's telling you 2 weeks, it's probably 8 weeks, 10 weeks. She said that all of their trysts took place at the Super 8 hotel near his house, and that she had been with him earlier that day. So that evening she was telling him she had been with her lover earlier that day. Oh my. Now, the reason she was confessing this to me is that she and her lover were confronted by his wife and his mother-in-law and father-in-law in the lobby of the hotel when they were walking out together. After this spectacle took place, the wife and her parents went to their company and reported what happened, and my wife and her lover were suspended. So the only reason she was confessing to him is because she got caught and it was going to come out anyway. After hearing all this, I'm sure you understand how I was feeling without me going into detail. Let me just say that I could write a novel about what transpired in the days that followed, but I'll keep it short. Initially, I was all headstrong on divorcing, but after thinking things through, I decided to stay in the marriage for one reason and one reason only: my 3 children, who were just 10, 8, and 7 at the time. I couldn't bear the thought of being separated from them, so we entered into a legal separation and my wife agreed to move into the guest bedroom in the basement. Now that's a switch because normally the guy ends up moving out and sleeping on the couch or sleeping in the basement somewhere. After getting caught, the gravity of the situation hit my wife and she begged for my forgiveness and offered to do whatever it would take for us to stay together. Very typical. This is what they all do once they're caught. We told both our families and they were really rocked by the news. We then sat down with our children and told them in an age-appropriate way. They were worried at first, as a number of their friends had divorced parents, but we reassured them that we would all be staying together, and they were fine after that. For the next 5 years, we existed strictly as co-parents, though my wife did everything she could to regain my trust and recapture what we once had together. I rejected all her advances, and we lived primarily as co-parents. We spent family time together and made sure to keep any sadness on her part and animosity on my part from our kids. That's important because you don't want the kids to see that playing out in front of them. You want to keep that behind closed doors and to yourselves. The only time I would speak with her is when we were with our children. And those times you would be hard-pressed to identify anything had changed. But when we were alone, I didn't speak to her unless it was something really important. Looking back on those days now, I feel like an ass for how I treated her. But you have to understand, the pain of what she did was still raw with me back then. After what she did to you, I don't blame you. Now, we're at a point in this story where I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, make sure you hit that like button right now. That will help out the channel tremendously and also help get this video seen by people all over the world. Now, let's go on with the story. 6 months into our separation, I began a 4-year relationship with a woman I worked with at my previous job. She had recently gotten divorced and found out about my situation through the grapevine. Now here's where I think he made a mistake. Hopefully he did check with his attorney to see how having this relationship with this woman would affect his legal separation and his divorce if he ever would proceed to divorce, because sometimes it can have an impact. And number 2, how does this look to his kids? Yeah, they were legally separated, but it's just so messy. It's funny, we never really got along when we worked together, but I always found her attractive. She later confessed that she felt the same about me, but neither of us ever acted on those emotions because we were both decent people who were happily married. And that's the way it should be. You meet people all the time that you might find physically attractive. Hey, that woman's attractive. Hey, this woman's attractive. Or a woman may say, hey, that guy's attractive. That guy's attractive. But if you have somebody at home, if you're in a relationship, you don't act on those emotions. While the physical intimacy was just what we both needed at the time, our relationship never developed much beyond that. Eventually, the passion started to fade and our meetups became less frequent. When this happened, we mutually agreed to end our relationship. However, we still occasionally keep in touch to this very day. So it sounds like they're keeping each other on the side there in case they ever want to reignite things for a little tryst here and there. A few months after that relationship ended, my wife and I started spending more time together. The rawness of my emotions had healed somewhat, and eventually we started having X again for the first time in 5 years. Now my question here is, while he was off with this woman, having this relationship with her, this FWB relationship, what was the wife doing? Was she just sitting at home waiting for him to come back? Or was she out getting something on the side as well? I guess we'll never know. We've been living like that ever since, going on 6 years now. Nothing has really changed in our relationship except for that. Well, that's a major change, mister. He says we're still legally separated and sleeping in separately, just as we have been since the day I found out. So they're now hooking up, but they're still sleeping separately. It sounds like he's got an FWB relationship, a live-in FWB relationship. I know my wife's goal is to dissolve the separation and return to the way things once were before, but I have no intentions of doing that. I've told her this a number of times over the years, but I think she just assumed we had moved beyond that point. After I declined her suggestion of renewing our wedding vows and having a big 25th anniversary celebration, I had another frank talk with her to make sure she was clear on where we stood. I explained that the relationship between us would never progress beyond what we have today. I told her the only way it would change would be through divorce, which I promised I wouldn't consider until after our daughter graduates next spring. I told her I like where things are between us now, and I'm not even thinking about divorce, but I could change my mind at some point in the future. So you can see he's really leveraging this, and I can't blame the guy, I mean, for what she did to him, but he's definitely leveraging that legal separation. This really upset her, and she asked if I still hate her for what she did 11 years ago. I told her I didn't hate her, but explained I'd never be able to trust her or completely forgive what she did to our family. And that's the thing that cheaters just can't understand. They think the passage of time is going to clear everything and heal everything, and it just doesn't. She asked if there was anything more she could do to change my mind. I told her there wasn't, but I let her know that I appreciated the dedication and love she has put into our relationship after her affair. I told her I didn't want her to be miserable and would understand if she wanted to proceed with divorce, which she could do at any time just like I could. She told me she was happy with the way things were and said she will never divorce me no matter what I did, even if I took up with another woman again. Now, I have a problem with her making that statement to him because if she really loved him, she would not want him going off with another woman again. She would want him all to herself. And the other thing that's very clear from this statement and from her actions when she had the affair is that she thinks physical intimacy is a low value thing and it's just a casual thing. It's just a pleasure thing. Because if she valued it, she'd only want that contact with her husband. So for now, that's how we'll continue living, unless one of us decides to bail at some point. Since we're both getting up there and we'll be approaching retirement age in a few years, the likelihood of that happening becomes less likely. So he says, hey, we're getting old, we're getting towards retirement age. Listen, guy, you're not old. Late 50s is not old. As I've gotten older, I really don't have an interest in going out there and trying to find a good woman. It's too much of a risk, and with my luck, I'd probably find someone who would be 10 times worse than my wife. Yeah, what I'm reading into this is that he really wants to keep things as they are now. He likes this setup. That's what I really think is going on with this guy. Over the years, there have been many times when I've questioned whether I did the right thing or not. About a year ago, I got my answer and I've never second guessed my decision since. It was a Saturday and my 3 kids and I were out having lunch at a local restaurant. Before our food came, my daughter told me, Dad, we have something we want to say to you, as she looked over at her brothers with them nodding and gesturing for her to tell me something. She then told me they just wanted to thank me for keeping the family together after everything went down with Mom. He says, big gasp. Where did that come from? This statement caught me completely off guard and I was left speechless. I started to say something but got choked up, at which point they all got up and hugged me. So that was nice. He probably felt I made this sacrifice and you know what? It was all worth it. That moment will go down as one of the best in my life, and since then I've never questioned my decision again. And that's the end of his story. Now, for those of you that have been watching my channel for some time, I'm sure you're aware that I normally recommend that if you've ever been cheated on, that you end that relationship and you move on with your life. However, the only exception to that rule would be situations like this, where you have a father who has young kids and he doesn't want to be separated from his kids. Now, normally in these divorces where children are involved, it's better to have 2 happy households than 1 miserable one. But if the parents can work it out and keep those tensions away from the kids, something like this can work. This way, both parents are there with the kids at all times, and they're not with one parent 50% of the time and the other one 50% of the time, or even less. So I applaud this father for wanting to do the right thing by his kids and making that sacrifice. I would never question anyone for doing that. Now, where he did make a mistake, and I pointed this out in the story, is when he had that relationship with that other woman. Yes, they were legally separated, but it gets really sticky there on a legal front, so you really have to make sure that you clear that with your attorney, that it's okay. And more importantly, what kind of message does that send to your kids? I mean, how do they interpret that? They know already, because you had that conversation with them, that their mother had some kind of relationship with another man. Now here you are going off and having a relationship with a woman. If it were me, I wouldn't have done that. But outside of that, I think this guy handled the situation well. Now, there's no question that he is leveraging this legal separation and keeping that over his wife's head so that she continues to do everything for him, and I'm sure treat him like a king since this all went down. And he's probably going to continue doing that for the rest of the time they're together. And on that subject, I don't think he has any intentions of divorcing her, and I don't think she has any intentions of divorcing him. So I think in his mind, he's like, hey, I got my revenge and more. I had 4 years of fun with this other woman. And since her affair, my wife has been treating me great. So therefore, I don't want to rock the boat. I want to keep things as they are. But for leverage, I'm going to keep that legal separation in place in the event in the future I decide to divorce her. So those are some of my thoughts on this story. And now I want to take a look at what I think are the morals of the story. The first one, parents who cheat are the absolute worst. I said that throughout this story, and I've said it on previous stories. Cheating itself is terrible, but when there are kids involved like this, it is the absolute worst thing you can do, and the people who do that are truly lowlifes. Next is exactly the opposite of that. Great parents are the absolute best. I think parents who make sacrifices in order to raise their kids right are the best people in society because they're raising the future generations. So, to all the great parents out there, I salute you. Next, attention and validation are irresistible for many women. We've talked about this over and over and over, and I think that's what happened in this case. Here's this woman, she was a stay-at-home mother for a while, then she gets back into the workforce in her 40s, and some guy is showing her interest, and she just couldn't resist it. That's not an excuse for her, but I'm telling you, with many women, and some people would say most women or all women, they cannot resist attention and validation. Hey, men like it too, but not to the same degree as women. Next, time does not heal the wounds caused by cheating. I have to keep reiterating that because in a lot of these stories, in a lot of these situations, the cheater always reverts back to, wow, it was so long ago, haven't you gotten over it? And the answer is no, the wounds will never completely heal. Next, those betrayed will never fully trust the betrayer again. And how could they? If they would cheat on you, what else would they do to you? If they're willing to cheat on you and disrespect you like that in the highest level, what else would they do to you? I wouldn't trust the cheater as far as I could throw him. And finally, men are never too old. Remember that, guys. If you wanted to go out there and start a relationship with a woman at age 80, you could do it. Look at some of these famous people just recently that have been having children in their late 70s and 80s. Now, I'm not saying that's a great thing to do, especially for the kids, but my point is if you want to go out there and start over and start a relationship, you can do it. But it's a personal decision on your part. So those are my thoughts, and now I'd like to hear from you. What do you think of this story, and how do you think this guy handled the situation? Would you have done what he did and stayed in that relationship to raise your kids properly? Or would you have divorced and split custody with your wife, likely 50-50 or something less? And also, what would you do if you did stay? And now your youngest child is going to be graduating from high school. Would you stay with your wife after that? Or would you divorce now? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you on the next one.